What they teach you in history class is a lie. They say World War I started with a single gunshot in Sarajevo, the assassination of an archduke. But that's just the cover story, the spark that lit the fuse. The real story, the one they don't want you to know, is about money, debt, and a secret financial war that had been brewing for decades. This isn't a story about soldiers and trenches. It's a story about bankers and balance sheets. Let's rewind to the late 1800s. The great European empires, Britain, France, Germany, looked powerful on the outside, but their foundations were rotting with debt. Decades of colonization, building massive railways across continents, and funding endless colonial wars had pushed them to the financial brink. They weren't funding this expansion with their own money. They were borrowing heavily from a new kind of global power, the private international banks. Names you might have heard whispered in conspiracy theories, the Rothschilds, the Barings, J.P. Morgan, Deutsche Bank, weren't just banks. They were the shadow empires. They held more power than kings and politicians because they controlled the one thing every nation needed, capital. These banking dynasties had created a global financial system where nations were treated like corporate clients, borrowing astronomical sums to build up their militaries and expand their colonial territories. This created a fierce, hidden economic war. What looked like patriotic nationalism and a noble quest for empire was, at its core, a ruthless competition for resources and markets. Germany wanted its place in the sun, not just for prestige, but to secure the resources needed to compete with Britain's global financial dominance. Every colonial skirmish, every naval arms race, was driven by an underlying financial imperative. Control more territory, control more resources, and you control your destiny. And at the heart of this fragile system was a ticking time bomb, the gold standard. In theory, it was meant to create stability. Every major currency, the British pound, the French franc, the German mark, was directly convertible to a fixed amount of gold. This created a rigid, interconnected global economy, but its stability was its greatest weakness. It meant that a financial shock in one country could trigger a catastrophic chain reaction across the entire world. Think of it like a web of dominoes. If one nation's economy stumbled, if a trade war broke out, or if a colonial rebellion disrupted the flow of resources, the panic would spread instantly. Nations started hoarding gold, seeing it as the only true measure of security. This obsession with gold made colonial possessions even more valuable. They weren't just land, they were treasure chests of resources that could be converted into gold, securing a nation's financial survival. The system made diplomacy fragile and escalation almost certain. When financial tensions rose, the only way out seemed to be military force. Behind the grand political alliances we read about, the Triple Entente and the Central Powers, lay a web of secret financial deals. Treaties weren't just about mutual defense, they were loan agreements. Nations didn't just promise soldiers, they promised access to oil fields, control of trade routes, and shares in colonial profits. The infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement, which carved up the Middle East, wasn't just a political map, it was a financial prospectus, dividing up the Ottoman Empire's resources between Britain and France. When the war finally broke out in 1914, it was the bankers who stepped in to pour gasoline on the fire. While America was officially neutral, its most powerful financier, J.P. Morgan Jr., made a decision that would change the course of history. He became the exclusive purchasing agent and financier for the Allies, Britain and France. He established a credit line that, in today's money, would be worth trillions of dollars. This wasn't just business. It was a gamble that tied America's entire economic fate to an Allied victory. Morgan's syndicate sold war bonds to American investors, essentially making millions of ordinary citizens shareholders in the war. If the Allies lost, the American economy would face a catastrophic collapse. The pressure for the U.S. to enter the war wasn't just about German submarines, it was about protecting Wall Street's massive investment. While Morgan was funding the Allies, the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, were forced to borrow internally from their own banks and citizens. They drained each other's gold reserves, strangling their own economies in a desperate attempt to keep their war machines running. The war became a battle of attrition, not just on the battlefield, but on the balance sheets. Which side would go bankrupt first? By the time the war ended, the world had been financially remade. The old European empires were shattered and hopelessly in debt. The United States, which started the war as a debtor nation, emerged as the world's supreme financial superpower, with Britain owing it a fortune. The center of global finance shifted permanently from London to New York. And the Treaty of Versailles, which officially ended the war, was the ultimate banker's document. It wasn't about peace, it was about debt collection. The impossible reparations demanded from Germany weren't just punishment, they were a mechanism to ensure Germany would keep paying the Allies, so the Allies could keep paying back their war loans to American banks. This crushing debt crippled Germany, fueled resentment, and laid the direct financial groundwork for the rise of extremism and the outbreak of World War II just 2 decades later. The legacy of this financial war is all around us. The modern institutions that govern our world, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, were born from the system of debt and control. The use of economic sanctions as a weapon of war is a direct echo of the financial blockades of World War I. So, the next time you hear about a conflict brewing somewhere in the world, look past the headlines and the political rhetoric. Ask yourself, who is funding this? Who is lending the money? Who stands to profit from the chaos, and who will be left with the debt? Because World War I taught us the deadliest lesson of all. War is not just fought with bullets and bombs. It's financed with bonds. And behind every great conflict, you will find a network of profit, debt, and financial power that turns human tragedy into a business opportunity. The real history is out there, but you have to know where to look. This entire global economy was a house of cards built on the gold standard. Every major currency was pegged to gold, which meant the system was dangerously rigid. A trade war, a colonial revolt, or a naval blockade could trigger a complete financial collapse. This forced nations to hoard gold and conquer territories not just for glory, but for economic survival. When tensions finally snapped, the financial system left no room for de-escalation. War became the only way out. Behind the public treaties and royal handshakes were hidden financial agreements. The so-called Great War wasn't about defending honor, it was about securing loans. For instance, Britain promised Italy parts of the Ottoman Empire, not for strategic advantage, but to bring them into the war and secure their financial backing. These deals weren't diplomacy, they were mergers and acquisitions written in blood. As the war machine roared to life, the bankers stepped in to fuel it. While America was officially neutral, J.P. Morgan Jr. became the exclusive purchasing agent and financier for Britain and France. He loaned the Allies billions, tying America's economic fate to their victory. Morgan's syndicate made a fortune for every bullet fired and every life lost. On the other side, Germany and Austria-Hungary were forced to borrow from their own people and banks, bleeding their economies dry. When the dust settled, the world map had been redrawn not by generals, but by creditors. The United States, once a debtor nation, emerged as the world's new financial superpower, with Europe owing it billions. The infamous Treaty of Versailles wasn't about peace. It was a debt collection notice, saddling Germany with impossible reparations that directly paved the way for World War II. This system of financing conflict never ended. The same machinery of debt, loans, and economic warfare is alive today. When you look at modern conflicts, look past the headlines and follow the money. Because war isn't just fought with bombs, it's bought with bonds. Thanks for watching, and if you want more hidden history, make sure to subscribe.